The line between work and life hasn't just blurred. It's gone. That's why you need someone behind you. Not just a card, an entire support system. Whether visiting the airport lounge to catch up on what's really important, or even using those hard-earned points to squeeze in a little family time. No one has your back like American Express. So no matter where you're going, we're right there with you. The powerful backing of American Express. Don't do business without it. Don't live life without it.
Because life can sometimes be messy, we've got you covered. WeatherTech is the ultimate way to protect your ride. From bump step, to cargo liners, to seat protectors. Along with floor liners that protect the front, back, and even up the sides. All to help keep those memories from being spoiled. Go to WeatherTech.com and order yours today. WeatherTech. Complete protection. Completely American made.
Only Invisalign clear aligners are made with Smart Track material to precisely move your teeth to your best smile. See how Invisalign treatment can shape your smile up to 50% faster today at Invisalign.com.
If you live with diabetes, why fingerstick when you can scan? With the Freestyle Libre, a continuous glucose monitoring system, you can check your glucose levels anytime without fingersticks. With the Freestyle Libre system, just scan the sensor and manage your diabetes. You can do it without fingersticks. Freestyle Libre is available with a prescription at participating pharmacies. Learn more at freestylelibre.us.
Hey, I'm Jonathan Scott.
And I'm Drew Scott.
Everyone's favorite brothers are on QVC with their Scott Living Collection. They've brought their great design sense.
We have so many options for you. We're trying to make design easy.
Expert advice.
It's all about creating different levels.
And quality products.
This is not going to rub off. I can wipe Jonathan's face. It's not going to come off in his beard.
So that your home can be its best.
Check out some of the latest items from our Scott Living Collection.
Ooh, where should we check it out?
Right on QVC.com.
Muckleshoot Bingo is home to 24-hour fun and daily specials that will have you coming back again and again. Fridays are red hot at Muckleshoot Bingo. That's right, on Fridays, players receive 10 free hot balls each session. Bingo on a hot ball and win an additional cash bonus. And for more fun, try your hand at 500 Vegas-style machines slot players will love. It's only at Muckleshoot Bingo in Auburn, the destination for Machingo.
When the facts are hidden in the shadows. When sources go silent because they're risking so much more. When every lead takes you further down a winding trail, but closer to the truth. And the challenge is greater because the stakes are higher. That's when the stories you unearth can shake the world.
Exclusive report from NBC News.
This is exclusive to us.
NBC News is out today with some exclusive new reporting.
The timing, as I mentioned, is a function of the collection of the facts, the evidence in the law, and a determination that it was sufficient to present the indictment at this time.
So timing is everything, and the timing of the 12 indictments against Russian intelligence agents will surely shape tomorrow's meeting between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. I want to bring in my panel, former U.S. Attorney and MSNBC contributor Joyce Vance, Katie Benner, New York Times Justice correspondent, and former FBI agent and MSNBC contributor Naveed Jamali. Katie, I'm going to start with you on this one. Do you think the timing of the indictments actually helped bolster President Trump and some of his allies' views that the Mueller investigation is actually a conspiracy to undermine the administration?
I think that the president and his allies will look for absolutely anything to be able to find a conspiracy. So, of course, you could say that the timing did help them with that. But the timing is also fascinating because it shows that the government, that the Justice Department in particular, has a lot of cards to play. And that while President Trump can win the short-term PR battle by attacking the Mueller investigation, the Mueller investigative team can always come back with hard facts that support them that will be remembered long after the president's complaints are done.
Joyce, what about the fact that the Americans that were listed in the indictments were not actually named? What does that tell you?
It doesn't really tell us a lot because DOJ policy is not to name people who are unindicted co-conspirators. So this indictment reads exactly the way I would expect it to read, but it is very fascinating to note that the indictment includes language which is pretty standard in conspiracies, and it says that the indictment includes co-conspirators who are named, but also those who are not included in the indictment and who are known and unknown to the grand jury. In other words, there are more people who are involved in this conspiracy.
Do you believe that those names could feasibly be come out and they're in the pipeline?
I think we'll see an additional indictment here that will include Americans. I think it defies belief to think that we won't see an indictment that includes Roger Stone, who was clearly the go-between with Guccifer and is referenced in this indictment. We don't know who Mueller plans to indict, but it seems very clear that this indictment last Friday was not the last indictment in this special counsel investigation.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, Joyce, you bring up the fact that we could easily see Roger Stone indicted, whereas Roger Stone is actually saying these indictments vindicate him. So two very different points of view there, to say the least. Naveed, just days after these indictments broke down these really elaborate efforts, as we know, by Russian operatives to interfere with the 2016 election, the Secretary of Homeland Security yesterday downplayed concerns that Russia actually plans to disrupt the upcoming midterm elections. Let's take a listen to that, and then we'll talk.
Right now, there are no indications that Russia is targeting the 2018 U.S. midterms at a scale or scope to match their activities in 2016. But let me go further. Just like the activity targeting internet-connected systems in other sectors, we do consistently observe malicious cyber activity from various actors against U.S. election infrastructure.
So she says they consistently observe sort of these malicious actions happening, but not to the scale to which they happened in 2016. What do you make of this?
Look, Russia still views the United States as their main adversary. We're their main target. That hasn't changed before Donald Trump entered the White House, and it certainly hasn't changed today. So whether the specific tactics that they're going to employ are going to be against the 2018 elections or in other areas, the point is their intent to harm the United States still sticks. And I just want to add one thing to what Joyce was saying, is I fully expect other indictments to come. Look, I spent 3 years working with the GRU, against the GRU, sitting down with Russian military intelligence officers like those that were indicted. And what I can tell you is that the Russians value people. They recruit people. And I fully suspect Russian tactics would have dictated that if they're going to pull out all the stops, they're going to use Americans. And it's important to remember that there are Americans that after Donald Trump won the election, met with Russians, including Michael Flynn, including Jared Kushner. And in fact, Michael Flynn actually pled guilty to lying to the FBI about those meetings. So I fully suspect that the Russians did not stop their intent to harm the United States after Donald Trump won the election. It's an
Is there a
important point to
possibility,
remember.
though, Naveed, that they care less about the midterms than they would about 2020? And so
I think that
there's a possibility that they're sort of tamping down their efforts now, staying quiet for now when it comes to the midterm elections, so as to say, hey, there's no smoke here, don't look.
Well,
and
absolutely.
then come 2020, they're back in the game.
Absolutely. Look, at the end of the day, what they're looking to do is to remain covert. I mean, the idea of using an intelligence operation is that A, it's not detected, and B, if it is detected, there's no attribution back to Russia. They know our defenses are up. It would be silly for them to come to the same door they used in 2016. They're going to find other ways, and you're absolutely right. They may come back in 2020. But I think that they're sufficiently worried that to do so again, they may not have the same result.
So, Katie, as we know, the president is continuing to deflect responsibility with regards to blaming President Obama and taking responsibility himself, and even going so far as to victim shaming the DNC. Let's take a listen to that.
This was during the Obama administration. They were doing whatever it was during the Obama administration. And I heard that they were trying, or people were trying to hack into the RNC too, the Republican National Committee. But we had much better defenses. I've been told that by a number of people. We had much better defenses, so they couldn't. I think the DNC should be ashamed of themselves for allowing themselves to be hacked.
So we do know, actually, in the indictments that were handed out on Friday, the Republicans were actually hacked. We also know during the Obama administration that the Obama administration went to Mitch McConnell and wanted a bipartisan effort saying that this is actually happening, that the Russian hacking, that there is Russian involvement in the 2016 election, and Mitch McConnell was not in support of putting that out there. But is there any evidence from your point of view to support President Trump's claim here?
Well, I think what we see in this claim is that we are dealing with an extraordinarily unorthodox president, and I know that we already know that, but it bears repeating that this is just not the way that a leader of the United States would typically respond to information that we had come under attack by a foreign power. And most people would want to look ahead and solve the problem. And I think that that President Trump's unorthodox leadership style might contribute to one of the reasons why we're not seeing the same scale of attacks on the midterms. If we think that the Russians were trying to destabilize the election process, destabilize Americans, drive them further apart, and destroy public discourse in the United States, they now have a great helper in the White House who, because he is very different from any president we've seen before, has helped to do that himself, and they might not actually need to work as hard this year as they did in 2015-16.
So Joyce, here's a big question. We know that there is no extradition treaty between the two countries, between Russia and the United States. Does it serve any purpose from your perspective for the president to demand that these indicted intelligence agents be extradited to the United States?
It really does, and it's critical that he demand that Putin turn these individuals over, even though we know that there are no extradition treaties that would require Russia to do that. But look, these are official Russian actors, military intelligence community members who are now charged with a conspiracy to hack and influence our election. And that demand has to be made. It's questionable for the president to go ahead with the meeting. But if he's going to go ahead and meet with Putin, he must underline this extraordinary moment where we're living in, where the government Putin is leading has been outed with its effort to influence the American election on Trump's behalf. There's just no parallel for this, and for him not to be strong and make this demand would just be extraordinarily disappointing.
All right, Joyce Vance, stick around for us. Kate Benner, Naveed Jamali, thank you both for joining me. Coming up, everybody, as Donald Trump prepares to meet face-to-face with the Russian president he so publicly hopes he can be friends with, he